I'm actually indebted to Kelly for my biggest chuckle of the month. That on her Facebook page, she had a thing about engineers, comparing them to pigs in mud. She said, arguing with an engineer is kind of like trying to manage a pig in mud. After a couple hours, you realize they really like it. Sometimes you find yourself in these intractable situations where you'd like to see it all just finish and end, but it just keeps going and going and going and going. If you have a chance to see the play Dunsinane down at the Shakespeare Theater, it is a wonderful piece of theater that talks about, it's actually a sequel to Macbeth, where Lady Macbeth lives on, and she comes back as Gruach and is the queen that's in an intractable fight with the King Malcolm, and then you have the intervention coming from London, and you find that these people who are principled people, you have Ruach, and you have Malcolm, and you have Seward, who are in this fight, and Seward coming from England, imposing a will, trying to impose peace. That's all he says he wants is peace, and of course in the process of doing it, he kills hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in that quest for peace, while the principled Scots, the people of Scottish descent who love to fight, just kept fighting and fighting and fighting. Much like it's a contemporary play that the people who talk quickly from not in that old Scotland territory to Iraq and Afghanistan and Myanmar and places like that where the fighting just seems intractable. Three choices as audiences, though, that you watch, and you have these three characters, and they're in their way all likable. And it's really hard to choose which one you would want to pick sides with, who you would want to, who was in the right. And you know, one of the nice things about being in the audience in a play is that you don't have to choose. You just watch and say, you know, that's really a good play. That's really a good play. It's really good. But somehow suspending choice, especially when there are three choices. That's the dilemma that Peter faced today in the gospel, is that it talks about how Jesus took these three disciples up onto the mountaintop, kind of like Kilimanjaro, where Mike's going to go to this afternoon, high up on the mountaintop, where there would be a mountaintop experience. And Jesus began to gleam. His clothes were so white and brilliant and dazzling that they were whiter than any bleach on earth could ever make them. And he was gleaming, and suddenly with him were Moses. Moses was the one who received the Ten Commandments on the mountaintop, and when he came down to the people, he was glowing. His face was shining so brightly that the people were terrified, and ultimately when he would talk over his face so they would not be so afraid. And there was also Elijah, the one who in our first reading was lifted up into the heavens in a chariot of fire that imprinted his stature. And maybe it was that this triangular relationship. You had Elijah, the one who was unrelenting, that he would never, in conflict with the people, he would never permit his country, his people, to in any way accommodate the worship of Baal in that ancient day. That he was opposed to that, or maybe it was the people who were, and there was a position there. There was the Zealots in Jesus' day would never permit the occupying forces of Greece or Rome or that culture to be accommodated, to be somehow incorporated into their Jewish culture of the day. Or there were the Pharisees and Sadducees who defined everything by the law. We can live within the empire as long as we can live in a civil society that honors these laws that are ours. And Rome was glad to accommodate that too. And then there was Jesus, the newbie, the new one who had been going through Israel, and he'd been going around stirring things up with healing people and baptizing people in the Holy Spirit, and stirring people up with yet another vision of what might be. And Peter is there looking at these three figures, and he didn't know what to say, or the Greek word is actually apokrythe. He didn't know what choice to make. He didn't know who to set aside. And when you don't have a choice, or you don't know what to choose, three choices, you don't know which one to do, you embrace them all, right? You try to find a way to not choose, to not select. And so he says, Jesus, why don't we build a booth for all three of you? We'll build booths, huts, shelters, little place that can accommodate you. We'll do it for all three, one for Moses, one for Elijah, one for you. And it's at that moment, it's at that time that this voice comes out from heaven. The voice in the cartoons with the hand pointing down, and out of the clouds, the voice says, "This is my son. Listen to him." And the second thing that happens is when all this terrible situation, when the lights go down and life goes back to normal, they look around and it's just Jesus who's with them. Just Jesus. Jesus alone. Now, this may not seem like, when you're at a play, I mean, my role in the theater the other night was not to be the judge about who was right or wrong. I had my opinions, maybe. There were things I liked and didn't like, but I didn't have to choose. But this is a choice that actually is important. At least that's what Paul is arguing or presenting to the Corinthians, that in the second book of Corinthians, the second letter to the Corinthians, that really... in our reading today, he talks about this. He says that even if our gospel is veiled, even if it's covered up like Moses was covered up, even if you can't really see it, it's veiled for people who are perishing. That in their case, the God of this world has blinded their minds, the minds of people who are, it's translated as unbelievers, it's apistos, who are without faith, for whom faith is set aside, who can't find their way to put their trust into this one. But they are kept from seeing, so that the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, does not shine on them. The translation, that the light is not shining on them. And if they want to get into the light, they have to be ready to put their faith in it, to make a choice or a decision, to set something apart that will do that. And why is that so important? In Corinthians, he's written that since then we have such a hope, we act with great boldness. Not like Moses, who put a veil over his face to keep the people of Israel from gazing at the end of the glory that was being set aside. He's saying we don't have to be like that. We don't have to cover ourselves up to avoid making the choices and decisions that come our way in life. He says their minds were hardened. Indeed, to this very day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their minds. There's a hardness that I'd rather avoid making this choice, and that requires a degree of toughness when you're dealing with issues of life and death, of living and dying, of loving or hating, of being together or being apart, or putting your trust, your faith, your very life into the hands of others. Those are big choices. But when one turns to the Lord, he said, the veil is removed. The obscurity, the obscuring of your vision of what it is that you can choose is removed. And all of us with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into that same image, from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. You are transformed by the choices you make. You are transformed when you put your faith in a Lord of life, one who gives life and sustains life and brings with life a spirit of forgiveness and grace that equips you to make the choices, to decide what good things you will set apart to preserve so that you can live and live in a sense of abundance. All of us, with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of the Lord, are being transformed by the glory that infuses life as a gift from God. Well, you might come to Transfiguration Sunday thinking, as I often have. I have to tell you, I was telling David, I think, before that and Kate and I were joking about this. I used to do a lot of circuit riding preaching. I was always in demand on Transfiguration Sunday. Nobody wants to talk about these texts because they're so hard, because the mystery is so great, because glowing Jesus and all of this stuff. But your life is in a process of transformation already. You are in transition. You are changing. We all are. Look at us. We are in the process of transfiguration. And Jesus comes and says, I am with you, whether your lights are coming on or whether they're going off. I am with you, and you will be transfigured. You will be transformed into the glory of God. That's worth thinking about for at least a week, don't you think? That's a good gospel message. That you can make decisions and be transformed, that the glory of the Lord is working through you as you do that. Right, wrong, or indifferent. You are an agent of transformation, not only in your life, but in this world. And if God is with us, who can be against us? And that is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God.